My name is Adam Green, and I am 35 years old. If there's one truth that has shaped my life, it's this. I grew up in a family where love and attention weren't equally divided. From as early as I can remember, my younger brother Brian was the shining star in my parents' eyes. And me? I was the shadow. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't say this with bitterness in my voice anymore. But as a kid, it hurt. It hurt in ways that still sting when I look back on birthdays, school plays, or even the smallest family dinners. Brian was always celebrated for being the charming one, the golden boy, the one with the big laugh and quick smile. And I was the quiet one. Responsible, yes, but never dazzling. Even when we were children, the favoritism wasn't subtle. On my 10th birthday, I remember unwrapping a small box with a pair of socks inside. Socks. And on Brian's birthday, just a month later, he got a brand new bicycle, red and shiny, the kind that made all the neighborhood kids stop and stare. I remember sitting on the porch that day, pretending I wasn't jealous, pretending I didn't want the kind of attention Brian got with every gift, every hug, every word of praise. My parents stood there clapping as Brian rode up and down the street, shouting for them to watch. And they did. They always did. That was the rhythm of our family. Brian first, Adam second. As I grew older, I learned to stop expecting much. If Brian came home with average grades, my parents would throw a little celebration, saying how proud they were of him. If I came home with straight A's, they'd smile politely, nod, and say something like, "Good, Adam. That's expected of you." When I got into college on a scholarship, my parents told me how proud they were of Brian for finding his passion, even though he dropped out after a semester. They called him a dreamer, a man who thought outside the box. When I graduated with honors, they didn't even come to the ceremony. They were busy helping Brian start a business. And that business? It failed within 6 months. But did my parents scold him? No. They comforted him, told him failures were stepping stones. Then they lent him money for another attempt. And another. And another. By the time Brian was 33, he'd started and sunk more businesses than I could count. Each one was financed by our parents, who dipped into their retirement savings to help him chase his dreams. Meanwhile, I worked quietly in real estate. I started small, saving everything I earned. I bought one rundown house, fixed it up, sold it. Then I bought 2 more. Slowly but surely, I built something stable for myself. But I didn't flaunt it. That wasn't my style. Still, my parents never seemed to notice. When we sat down at family dinners, Brian would talk endlessly about his next big idea, and my parents would hang on every word like he was the second coming of Einstein. When I tried to share updates about my life, about the homes I was restoring or the small rental business I was building, their eyes glazed over. "You've always been responsible, Adam," my father would say. But Brian's got that spark. That spark was debt. That spark was reckless spending. But they couldn't see it. It all came to a head last Christmas. Christmas in the Green family had always been a spectacle. Lights strung across the roof, a 12-foot tree in the living room, garlands on every banister. My parents loved the show of it all, the image of a perfect family holiday. And every year, Brian was at the center of it, telling jokes, pouring drinks, basking in attention. I arrived with my girlfriend Sophie, carrying a carefully wrapped basket of homemade jams, cookies, and a bottle of wine. Sophie always said I had a knack for thoughtful gifts, for paying attention to the little things. But I knew in my parents' eyes, no gift I brought could ever shine as brightly as whatever Brian did. When we walked in, the house smelled like cinnamon and roast turkey. My mother rushed over to hug Brian first, squealing at the sight of him. "Oh, Brian, you made it. The party can really start now," she said. Then she turned to me, gave me a polite smile, and added, "Hello, Adam. Sophie, good to see you." I'd grown used to it, but Sophie squeezed my hand, giving me that look she always did when she thought I was swallowing something painful. The night unfolded the way it always did. Brian loud and boisterous, my parents hanging on his every word. Extended family nodded along, pretending not to notice the imbalance. I sat back, letting it wash over me. Then came the gift exchange. We all gathered around the tree, laughter filling the air. My parents brought out a small velvet box, their faces glowing with excitement. They handed it to Brian, and he tore it open dramatically, like a child. Inside was a Rolex watch, gleaming under the Christmas lights. "Wow," Brian shouted, holding it up for everyone to see. "A Rolex? Are you serious?" My parents clapped, tears in their eyes. You deserve it, son. For all your hard work, your passion, your drive. I felt Sophie stiffen beside me. She whispered, "That's at least 10 grand." I nodded, my throat tight. 10 grand for Brian, while I'd gotten socks at 10 years old. Some things never changed. Then my mother turned to me, holding an envelope. She handed it to me with a quiet smile, nothing like the dramatic flourish Brian got. For a moment, I braced myself for the worst. Maybe a gift card, maybe nothing at all. I opened the envelope, unfolded the papers inside, and froze. It wasn't a card. It wasn't money. It was the deed to my parents' house. I blinked, my mind struggling to process it. This is the deed to your house," I said slowly. The room went silent. Brian's jaw dropped. My parents exchanged a look, then nodded. "Yes, Adam," my father said softly. "It's yours now." And just like that, everything changed. The room was so quiet. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I kept staring at the papers in my hands, my heart hammering. The words were clear: my name, the property address, the signatures. The house that my parents had lived in for over 30 years, the one I grew up in, was now legally mine. Brian broke the silence first. "What the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, louder than the crackling fire behind him. "It's the deed, Brian," my father said, his voice calm but heavy. "We've signed the house over to Adam." Brian laughed, at first a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Then it turned bitter. "You're joking, right? You give me a Rolex, and you give him the house? Are you out of your minds?" My mother shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap. "Brian, please. We thought long and hard about this. The house needs to be in responsible hands." "Responsible hands?" Brian spat, glaring at me. "You mean boring Adam? The guy who's never taken a risk in his life? The guy who hides away flipping houses like some handyman? You're rewarding him for being boring." I said nothing. I just folded the deed back into the envelope, keeping my expression as neutral as possible. Sophie reached for my hand under the table, squeezing gently. "This is insane," Brian continued, his face flushing red. "I'm your son too. I'm the one who's always had ambition, always reached for more. And you're telling me you'd rather give this house to him than to me." My father leaned forward, his voice firm. "Brian, ambition without responsibility is recklessness. We've bailed you out more times than I can count. The house is our legacy. We need to know it won't be squandered." Brian slammed his hands on the table, making the dishes rattle. "Squandered? Is that what you think of me? That I'd throw away your legacy?" My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. "Brian, honey, we love you. But we can't ignore the past. The loans we gave you, the failed businesses, the debts you never repaid. That was all part of building something great." Brian shouted, his voice breaking. "You always told me to dream big, and now you're punishing me for it." The relatives sat frozen, some pretending to sip their drinks, others exchanging uneasy glances. The air was so thick with tension, it was hard to breathe. I finally spoke, my voice steady. "Brian, this isn't about punishing anyone. Mom and Dad made a decision. Maybe it's time to respect it." His eyes snapped to me, burning with fury. "Of course you'd say that. You've always been the perfect little lapdog. You probably manipulated them into this, didn't you? Whispered in their ears, made yourself look good while making me look bad." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know about it until 5 minutes ago." But Brian wasn't listening. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This isn't over," he muttered. "You can't just cut me out. I deserve that house more than anyone. I'm the one who's always been the face of this family. Everyone knows that." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I kept my mouth shut. There was no reasoning with him when he was like this. The rest of Christmas dinner was ruined. Brian sulked in silence, stabbing at his food. My parents tried to lighten the mood, but their voices were strained, brittle. Sophie and I exchanged glances, silently agreeing to leave as soon as we could. As we drove home that night, Sophie finally spoke. "How do you feel?" I stared out the window, the glow of Christmas lights blurring past. "I don't know. Shocked mostly. I never expected this. Part of me feels guilty, like I've taken something from Brian. But another part feels like this is the first time my parents have ever really seen me." Sophie reached over, brushing her fingers against mine. "You've earned their trust, Adam. You've always been steady, always responsible. They finally recognized it. Don't feel guilty for that." But guilt was exactly what I felt. Not because I had the house, but because Brian's anger was only the beginning. And I was right. In the weeks that followed, Brian's resentment only grew. He called me constantly, demanding I fix it. He showed up at my place unannounced, shouting on the doorstep, accusing me of betrayal. He sent emails to our parents, long rants about favoritism, twisting the story to make himself the victim. Family dinners became unbearable. Brian would sit across from me, his eyes full of venom. He made little digs, sarcastic remarks that cut sharper than knives. "Careful, everyone," he'd say with a smirk. "Don't breathe too hard in this house, or Adam might evict you." Our parents tried to keep the peace, but the cracks were too deep. My father aged years and months, his shoulders stooping under the weight of constant arguments. My mother cried often, torn between her two sons. I stayed quiet, weathering the storm. I didn't lash out, didn't rise to Brian's bait. I focused on my work, on Sophie, on building something stable out of the chaos. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. The storm was only gathering strength. And the day it finally broke would change everything. The storm finally broke one cold February evening. I was at the house, my house, helping Mom sort through old photo albums in the attic. Dad sat downstairs in his recliner, sipping tea, his breathing heavier than usual. The walls felt heavy with silence, the kind of silence you learn to read after years in a family where love and resentment mix like oil and water. Then the front door slammed. "Adam." Brian's voice echoed through the house, sharp and jagged. "Get down here. Now." Mom flinched, clutching an album to her chest. I set it down and hurried downstairs, my stomach already tightening. Brian stood in the living room, red-faced, a stack of papers in his hands. His Rolex gleamed under the lamplight, but his eyes, wild, bloodshot, looked nothing like the confident brother I once knew. "What's this I hear about a will?" he demanded, slamming the papers onto the coffee table. Dad stirred, lifting his gaze slowly. "Brian, please, not like this. Not like this." Brian barked. "You already gave him the house, and now you're telling me the rest of your assets, the savings, the land, everything, are going to him too? What am I, chopped liver?" Mom's lips trembled. "Brian, honey," we tried to explain. "We wanted security, stability. We know Adam will take care of things. We trust him." Brian's fists clenched. "You don't trust me? After everything I've done for this family?" I couldn't help myself. I finally snapped. "Everything you've done? You mean the businesses you started and left in ruins? The loans you never repaid? The times you called Dad at 3 a.m. begging for bail money? That's what you mean by everything." He turned on me, veins bulging in his neck. "Shut up. You think you're better than me because you play Mr. Responsible? You've always been jealous. Jealous of me. Jealous of how people looked at me. Jealous of my confidence." I stood taller, my voice firm but calm. "No, Brian. I'm not jealous. I'm tired. Tired of cleaning up after you. Tired of watching Mom cry because she doesn't know if you're safe. Tired of seeing Dad age 10 years every time you screw up. And tired of you acting like the world owes you something." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, even Brian seemed stunned into silence. Then he lunged at me, his hands gripping the front of my shirt. "You think you've won, don't you? You think just because they gave you the house, you're some kind of hero. But you'll see, Adam. You'll see what happens when you cross me." Dad struggled to stand, his voice trembling. "Enough. Brian, sit down. Now." Brian froze, his grip loosening. Something about Dad's tone, the authority, the finality, cut through his rage. He released me with a shove and collapsed onto the couch, seething. That was the night my parents made everything official. Within a week, they called a family meeting with their lawyer. I'll never forget that day. The four of us sat around a polished oak table, the lawyer flipping through documents with clinical precision. Brian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking as if he already knew the outcome. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker have amended their will. Upon their passing, all assets, including the savings accounts, the farmland in Greene County, and the family house, will transfer to their son, Adam Whitaker." Brian's smirk vanished. His face drained of color, then flushed bright red. "What?" he hissed. The lawyer continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Additionally, their eldest son, Brian Whitaker, has been left a token sum of $1. The silence was deafening. I swear I could hear the sound of Brian's Rolex ticking against the table. $1, he stammered, his voice cracking. "That's a joke. That's got to be a mistake. Mom. Dad. Tell him that's a mistake. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. It's not a mistake, Brian. We had to make a choice. Dad's voice was steady, though thick with emotion. We love you, son. But love doesn't mean enabling. We can't keep watching you burn everything down. This is our legacy, and we trust Adam to protect it. Brian shot out of his chair, knocking it over. His face twisted into something between rage and despair. So that's it. You're cutting me out like I'm nothing? After everything I've done for you. Dad looked at him squarely. Brian, we've given you everything. Our time, our money, our patience. But you've never given anything back. This is the consequence of your choices. The lawyer cleared his throat, sliding the papers across the table for signatures. If everyone could please sign here. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. Part of me wanted to refuse, to push the papers back and tell them to rethink it. But another part, stronger, colder, knew this was justice. Not revenge, not favoritism, justice. When the last signature was done, Brian stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That night, Mom cried quietly on the couch. Dad sat beside her, staring at the floor. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides. Did we do the right thing? Mom whispered. Dad didn't answer. He just reached over, took her hand, and squeezed. The fallout was brutal. Brian cut ties completely. He blocked my number, refused to attend family gatherings, and spread rumors to anyone who would listen, telling them I had manipulated our parents, stolen his inheritance, turned them against him. Some relatives believed him. Others stayed quiet, not wanting to take sides. I focused on the house, on repairing the roof, repainting the shutters, trimming the overgrown garden. Piece by piece, I rebuilt not just the home, but the history inside it. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think of Brian. And then, 1 year later, Christmas again, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find him standing there. But he wasn't the same Brian. His Rolex was gone. His clothes looked worn, his eyes hollow. He stood in the snow, his breath fogging in the air. Adam, he said quietly. His voice was stripped of its usual arrogance. I need help. I froze, staring at him. For a moment, I thought of all the years of pain, all the arguments, all the chaos he'd brought into our lives. And then I thought of Mom, of Dad, of the house that had been entrusted to me, not as a weapon, but as a shelter. I stepped aside. Come in. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real gift all along. Life has a way of revealing truths in the most unexpected ways. My parents thought the Rolex would be a symbol of success, but the deed, the responsibility, the trust, was the greater treasure. In the end, revenge wasn't in cutting my brother out. It was in proving, quietly and steadily, that legacy isn't built on flash but on faith. And that's the story of the Christmas when everything changed.